Welcome back, everyone, to Remember What's Next. Rabbi Ken Spiro, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Last time I saw you was in Toronto at an
Yeah,
exciting event.
it was super fun. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So lots of people did you have a lot of people coming up to you saying, "Hey, I listened to your podcast," or "I've seen you speak." I'm sure you
Yeah,
had
yeah.
lots of fans there.
I'm a I'm a legend in my own mind already.
Well, apparently in other people's minds too. So that's pretty fun. They were all really excited,
So are you.
that
So are
I had
you.
celebrities at my wedding. It was really fun.
You're the
Okay.
celebrity.
So let's jump in. We really want to talk today about what is going on in the north of Israel. It would be really helpful, I think, for all of us to have a little bit of an idea of what are we dealing with Hezbollah? Why are they saying that if they make peace with Gaza, then maybe they'll like lay off also? What is the connection between Hezbollah and Iran? Can we understand a little bit more about Iran and why they're even a player in this particular round of things?
Yeah, so just a little bit of background history on Iran. You could do hours of talking about Iran, one of the really early great civilizations that goes all the way back, like the Middle Bronze period, time of Abraham. I mean, we're interacting. The Jewish relationship with Iranians is not something new. I mean, the with the whole transition between the first and second temple period 2,500 years ago, the story of Purim takes place in the Persian Empire, which is, we're talking about Iran, Persia. It's more or less interchangeable terms there. So we've been interacting with them for a long time. Iran is a very ancient civilization. They are Muslim as of the mid 7th century. They originally were not. There are many dynasties. Go to Wikipedia, and they have like a very long section on the history of Iran. But with the
What
rapid
would they
expansion of
have
Islam,
been before being Muslim? What was Iran before it became Muslim?
well, Zoroastrianism is the original religion of Iran, which is a dualistic faith of Ahura Mazda, the god of light, and Ahiram, the god of darkness. There's a lot of interesting discussion that was really the first monotheistic faith. I don't. I think I call it a dualistic faith. Judaism did not emerge from Zoroastrianism, although we were definitely impacted by the cultures of Mesopotamia, Assyria, Babylon, and Persia. Definitely all the way into the months we use in Hebrew today, and the alphabet we use to write Hebrew in comes from that part of the world. It's called the Syrian script, which is an empire
Mm.
that predates the Persian Empire. But as of the mid 7th century, with the rapid expansion of Islam as both a faith and an empire, the Persians become Muslims. So, and there's many dynasties going all the way up until, just to fast forward because it's way too big a topic, but to fast forward to the Qajar dynasty, which is the last dynasty, which runs from the very late 18th century until about 1925, because in World War One, okay, Iran is kind of caught between a lot of people. It's the Russian Revolution of 1917 and the British, and oil becomes very interesting to the world. You know, around 1908, I believe oil was discovered in Iran. You know, the modern Middle East writ large is a byproduct of the colonial interests of primarily France and England, but England plays a very big part in
Mm.
this period of time. But again, to simplify the narrative, that last dynasty in 1925, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was a general in the Iranian army under the last ruler. Basically, there's a coup in Iran. He takes over. So Iran now, so he's a usurper. He's not of one of the ancient dynastic lines. He's a military guy, which we see often in the Middle East. And again, he basically is going to rule Iran until the around the time of World War II. In World War II, the Nazis are everyone's involved in Iran. Again, it's a complicated story, but
Right.
he's basically deposed by basically the British. And his son, who's Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who's the one we all tend to know about, he comes to power at this period of time, and he will remain in power. Now he is a he really tries to move kind of like Kemal Ataturk does in Turkey after World War One, when the Ottoman Empire collapses, and he makes it the Turkish Republic and tries to westernize it and more secularize it and modernize it. Uh, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi does the same thing with
And is
Iran.
this the age of what we would call the Shah?
Well, he is. This is the second Shah. This is the son of Reza Shah. He's Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who is the Shah who was the last Shah that all of us know about anyone unless you're, I
Right.
guess, below above the age of like 80. You wouldn't know of any other Shah, but that his
And just to
attempts to,
ask, like, just to clarify, is the Shah
yeah,
like a king figure or is it a democratic figure? Like, how does that fit into how we understand rulers?
well, the Shah is really like an emperor. As a matter of
Ah,
fact,
okay.
a little piece of trivia, the idea that, chess, which comes from Persia, the term checkmate, what does that mean? Checkmate. So I heard it means shachmat, that the Shah's dead, that it's
Wow.
the emperor's gone. So that's the actual term. It was adopted by the Christians who replaced the ship with a bishop in the chess pieces. I've never seen
Interesting.
bishops. I've never seen bishops go sideways, but ships certainly
Right.
tack in that direction when they're sailing. And that's a class we'll have on the history of chess. But yes, the Shah traditionally, I mean, these are all empires that are run by emperors. So although there is a parliament in Iran during this time, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi takes on a lot of powers. He really runs the country. It reminds me similar to kind of what England is before it really emerges as a true democratic state where the king just becomes
Mm,
like a figurehead. He sells
okay.
a lot of power. And again, to understand the background to where Iran is today, the Ayatollah Khomeini, the original Ayatollah Khomeini, because they have Khomeini and Khomeini, and their names are very confusing. He was a Shiite spiritual leader. That's another point to throw in, that the Muslim world is divided into um, actually three groups, but the two big groups that we know of are Shiite and Sunni. And Sunni, which means the way, view themselves as the conservative. They view themselves as the traditional Muslims, and they're about 85% of the Muslim world. Shiites are an offshoot that begins in the year 680 over, without going into a whole class on Shiite and Sunni theology,
Which
but
we've done,
the
by the
real,
way. If anyone wants to go
right.
back and look at that, we have a whole history of Islam where you can look at all the, Sunni Shiite lineages and history.
So the core issue is really over who's the successor to Muhammad, and Shiites hold that it has to be from a specific bloodline, from Ali, who is a cousin and a son-in-law of Muhammad, whose son Hussein is killed at the Battle of Karbala in 680 of the Common Era. That leads to the Shiite-Sunni split. And today there is Azerbaijan and Bahrain and Iraq and Iran are majority Shiite countries. There's Shiites scattered other places, but they're only 15% of the Islamic world. There's a huge rivalry between Sunni and Shiites. It's more than just a theological rivalry. It spills into a power struggle, which reverberates all the way through the Middle East today, and it's very much at play in the geopolitical and strategic realities of what's going on in the Middle East as we're speaking now. But his attempts to modernize Turkey, same thing happened in Turkey now. Would you see that with Erdogan is much more of an Islamist than Turkey was originally planned to be when Kemal Ataturk kind of modernized it. So too the original Ayatollah Khomeini, who led the Islamic Revolution in 79, was exiled in 1964 for agitating against the Shah, and he moved to Turkey, then to Iraq. And then there was a lot of political instability in 1978, 79 in Iran, because he ran a police state. I mean, it was not a democracy. By the way, that state of Iran under the Shah had very close ties with Israel and was supported by the United States. The U.S. was a huge supporter of. They didn't participate in the oil embargo in 1973. Very close allies. Their weapons were coming from America. There was military cooperation between Israel and Iran. It was a really interesting relationship that all comes crashing down in 1979 when basically Iran falls apart. The Shah loses control of the country. He flees. He actually ended up, I believe, and he's buried in Cairo. I don't know if he fled to, maybe he was. I think he went to Egypt. I think he fled there. But the Ayatollah, who was exiled, comes back from exile, and Iran in 1979 is basically converted from the Shah thing into the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is run by a Shiite theocracy, which then embarks on a huge war with Iraq, which is
Wow.
very nasty and with massive casualties in the 1980s, for those of us who remember that. But basically, what's been going on at play, certainly in the last several decades, is a larger rivalry, which we have spoken about before, which is who's going to dominate the Middle East. Because Shiite and Sunni Muslims, people tend to simplify and think it's the Islamic world, the Arabs against the Jews. No, there's a lot of fighting amongst different groups. And the big battle is the Iranian Shiite regime rules views itself on a theological and a political and a strategic level as being the people who want to take over the Middle East. And their big rivals, theologically, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, to some any Sunni country for sure, but especially Saudi Arabia is they're viewed as because they're then you have the Turks and you have the Saudi Arabians and Egypt are these big Sunni powers, even though the Turks are not Arabs, they're Turkish people. So there's a lot of other stuff going on there, but they've made the major focus of their animus the Western civilization because Islamic worldview, especially the radicalized version of it that the Islamic Republic likes to export to the world, is hell bent on physical and spiritual conquest of the world, which is part of mainstream Islamic worldview, by the way. It's not a radical idea. Muslims believe that the world is destined to eventually become Dar al-Islam, the world of Islam, and everyone will either become Muslim or be subjugated by Muslims. It doesn't mean that all Muslims are doing this. Most Muslims just minding their own business and not exporting the global jihad, but Islam can be read in many different ways, more moderately and more radically. And the Iranian 12th generation Imam believing Shiites who run that Islamic Republic are very radicalized and very into the Islamic Revolution Shiite style. And their main focus of hatred has been Israel for being a non-Muslim state in the heart of what used to be a Muslim controlled piece of land, which is theologically anathema. It's unacceptable to the Islamic worldview. And B, Israel is the frontline Western state embedded in the Middle East, surrounded by Muslim, mostly Arab states. And it's not an accident that the Iranians call Israel the little Satan and call America the great Satan. So there's a lot of things going on here, but they really make the focus of their number one goal is, and they openly call for this all the time. The fact that they're allowed to stay in the UN and do this is a violation of being a member of the UN. They openly call for the destruction of the state of Israel.
So would you say that basically when it comes to Israel and the United States, in Iran's view, they are the two things that stand in the way of domination? Like really in terms of empire building, if they want the entire Middle East to be under, say, the Ayatollah or that particular brand of Islam, and then eventually the entire world to be under that it would seem that Israel and the United States are the two sort of forces that stand in the way of the possibility of that happening. Is that accurate to say it that way?
Yeah, 100%. On a strategic level, Israel is a teeny tiny country. Israel has all of, like 7 million Jews living in or something like that. And a Muslim minority population, but it's a strategic and military superpower that, although it maintains the policy of nuclear ambiguity, everyone knows that Israel has nuclear weapons. Right. So, and that's why Iran is really trying and never be allowed to have, but is trying to get those nuclear weapons because Iran knows that as long as Israel is a superpower little mini state in the Middle East, where, by the way, Iran has almost 90 million people in it, is a heck of a lot bigger than Israel. Wow. Iran can't do what it wants to do in the Middle East. It's already made huge inroads into it. It's destabilized and largely runs Lebanon, which was a very delicately balanced country until the Palestinians invaded South Lebanon and destabilized it and caused a civil war. And it's basically running Syria. It has a huge chunk of Iraq, excuse me, which is a Shiite majority country. It has influence in all these militias over there. It is, of course, very deeply embedded with Hamas, which is ironically a Sunni Islamic entity, but nonetheless, for the sake of my enemy's enemy's my friend, for the sake of heading Israel, it will align itself with Hezbollah, which is Iran's largest proxy, which is completely in violation of UN Resolution 1701, which ended the 2006 Second Lebanon War. There's not supposed to be any military force from the border with Israel, the Blue Line, as it's called, to the Litani River, which is 18 miles away, except the Lebanese army, which is a completely powerless force. So, and they have the Houthis. So wherever there's Shiites, who are again a minority, wherever they can get, and in some cases Sunnis, like with Hamas, they are spreading their influence, backing with their oil revenue primarily these different militias and armies and fighting forces, and hoping to first and foremost take Israel out and then foment massive chaos in the Middle East so they could take control of everything and make it one giant Shiite controlled, Islamic republic, and then spread the revolution elsewhere.
So how is this playing out now then in the north of Israel? And what are we looking at when, say, if Iran is backing Hezbollah and Gaza? Not only that, we recently heard in the press that Iran is also backing the protests on campus. So there seems to be a full-fledged push towards eliminating what they call the little Satan and the big Satan, whether from within or from without. First of all, where's Iran getting all the money? And how do we respond to this threat? How do we deal with them?
So, I mean, where Iran gets all its money from is primarily oil. And the Iranian economy is in a shambles. And the Iranian, not to do a whole class on the nuclear, the Western world's attempt to keep Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, which in my opinion is absolutely critical, because it's one thing I always say kind of cynically, but in a humorous way, that I long for the days of the Cold War, because when America's big enemy was the Soviet Union, which had a massive amount of nuclear weapons, but this is a communist atheist regime that doesn't believe there's anything besides this world. These people are not going to want to push the button so fast because that's it for them, But when you give nuclear weapons everyone should look up, 12th Imam Shiitism and understand that this is Islam has a messianic concept called the Mahdi, but they specifically have a concept there that there's this 12th Imam. The first is Ali, who is the son-in-law and cousin of Muhammad. But the 12th Imam is he's hidden, and he's going to reappear at the end of days in kind of like a cataclysmic, like the book of Revelations in the Christian Bible, where the Gog and Magog. There's going to be massive political instability in the world. And then the Mahdi will appear, in their case, the 12th Imam, and he will bring about the redemption of humanity, and the whole world will become one giant Dawlat Islam. These are not people you want to give nuclear weapons to. You don't want to give weapons to
because they will not think, they don't hold this life as sacred. They're holding that it's more sacred what happens in the afterlife. Is that what you mean?
They think they're going to bring about the end of days and the happy ending to their story from their perspective by bringing about an Armageddon-like scenario. And also they have this concept, of course, of the whole martyrdom idea, which is big in Islam in general, and it's become very big. The Shaheed idea, that glorification of death. These are not people who are, I don't think the average Iranian, by the way, is not this. You should know, the more crazy, anti-Western and anti-Israel the government, this is the rule in the Middle East, the less crazy and less anti-Israel the street is. You have at football games in Iran, people like doing pro-Israel chants and screaming anti-mullah, anti stuff against the Iranian leadership. But from the top down, and Iran is a police state. You have the Republican Guard, which has complete absolute control over everything that goes on in that country. From the top down, they are all into fomenting these kind of crises in the world. And to give these people nuclear weapons, huge problem. They were kind of dancing around and lying and bargaining. The Middle East people are great at bargaining, especially with Westerners. They know how to really get the better of the deals always, constantly violating what percentage they're going to enrich their uranium, etc. And always pushing a little more. And when Trump was in power, by the way, he did a really good job. He pulled out of that agreement, realizing that they weren't keeping to it. And he really had Iran up against the wall financially, because if you cut off their ability to export oil, they really don't have the ability to foment and pay forget their own country, which is going through massive inflation and economic instability that you don't hear about because there's no free press, but also foment all the revolutionary movements and arm all these militias around the world. And I know when Obama became president, he literally gave them billions of dollars of cash.
So I think, just to clarify for me, what you're saying is to allow Iran to have nuclear weapons is handing a weapon of mass destruction to a government, not necessarily the people, but a government that does not care if its own people or the people of its enemy die in service of its religious aims. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
So the religious fanaticism that controls the government in Iran says whoever has to die in order to achieve our religious aims, this bringing of the Mahdi, is fair game.
Right. And that's the glorification of you look at the movies from Gaza and women talking about we have lots of children, we want them to die as martyrs. You should know in the Iran-Iraq war in the early 80s, the Iranians were very short on military equipment. Iraq had a lot more backing from a lot of countries. And with the few tanks they had, rather than risk them losing them on mines, they would take young Iranian boys, give them like their nice, like martyrdom scarf around their head, and give them a plastic key to heaven and have them run in front of the tanks to detonate the mines.
Wow.
So this is the attitude that, so these are not people that, but they are, think about it. It's not me. I'm not being harsh here. If Iran were to have a regime change or just disappear or have no ability to foment revolution, a massive amount of political instability, revolution, civil wars in the world would disappear. They are the number one biggest purveyor of violence, revolution, and instability in the world. And the fact that the West is not willing to stand up against them and push, because they ain't a superpower. They have nothing except missiles. Right. Their Air Force, everything they have, all their military equipment is from the 1970s from the US. That helicopter just crashed, killing the last president, probably because it never have replacement parts. Right. So these people have nothing. I mean, despite
so how are they doing what they're doing, and how do we navigate this? What's coming down the pipeline? First of all, I think a lot of us are really concerned about this second war front, either with not so much with the Houthis, but definitely with Hezbollah. What do we do with this?
Well, how they do what they're doing is, unfortunately, because of, in my opinion, very poor leadership in the Western world over the last couple of years. It's going back 6-8 years, whatever now. And America is viewed as being very weak, and also because of what's happened we've now created a new alliance of a bunch of countries that is very bad for the rest of the world, which is basically China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. These are rogue states now, and
who are now emboldened players in multiple situations and funding all kinds of things. And it's created, like you said before, like this axis of evil, this unholy partnership.
So the Chinese, who desperately need oil, are happy to get it from the Russians and happy to get it from the Iranians. And even if they try and blockade their oil supplies going to the West, they now have new markets. They're setting up their own way of dealing financially with this without using the US dollar. It's a very dangerous thing, even though these countries have nothing in common with each other, literally nothing in common, except that they are my enemy's enemies, my friend. And we've, through bad, in my opinion, international policies, kind of forced them together into. So Iran is now flush with plenty of cash and armed Hezbollah, especially to the teeth. Israel has constantly been involved over the last many years in doing airstrikes in Syria and in Lebanon and in Iraq against weapon shipments to try and, because Iran is trying to create a multi-front war against Israel. We have Hezbollah's already embedded in the border for a long time now. They're basically in Syria, that country they more or less control. They're trying to build up a presence there to threaten Israel on the Golan Heights, and also in Iraq. And now we have the Houthis that are farther away. So we've already seen that. Why is Hezbollah even involved? Hezbollah is Iran's largest, most dangerous proxy. It's involved because Israel didn't do anything to Hezbollah, even though they shouldn't be where they are. It's when Hamas attacked and perpetrated that slaughter of 1,200 people on October 7th, and Israel went, rightfully so, into Gaza to clean out the hornet's nest of vile terrorists that have taken over that piece of land. Hezbollah immediately, to show support, opened up a second front, but playing a very delicate game, because it's amazing the dance that's going on now, because they have like 150,000 missiles. Many of them are big warheads, much more sophisticated and accurate. They can hit everything in Israel, like 10 times the number of missiles, and better quality, a much larger fighting force that is much better trained and battle hardened fighting in places like Syria. They don't have tanks. They don't have a lot of artillery. They have no air force. They have no navy. They may have a few little patrol boats or something, but they have nothing. It's all missiles, and fighting force. And again, tunnels, mines, and they fortified the whole border with Israel. So it's like this, let's fire enough missiles into Israel to distract Israel, to make them divert some of their military force there. The Houthis are doing the same thing. They're doing some from Iraq. And it's a game of, you blow up this, I respond this way. And Israel, the problem is it's set up a very dangerous precedent that Israel has now evacuated like 80,000 people from our northern border who've been gone
Mm.
now since October 7th. That is
Right,
a horrendously bad precedent. You cannot allow that. And just like
right,
people won't move back into Gaza until Hamas is eliminated, people are not going to move back into a place like Kiryat Shmona, which has been really badly damaged, until the immediate Hezbollah is either eliminated or moves back to where it's supposed to be, which is 18 miles away from the border, which still gives it missile range, but makes it
right,
much, much, much harder to do any damage to Israel. So pretty much, if you're here in Israel, everyone is talking. All of even my kids who are in the army, my son-in-law, whatever. Everyone's not saying when, not saying if we fight Hezbollah. Everyone is when. And
right,
as things are winding down with Hamas, we know that they're going to probably take off with Hezbollah because the situation, the status quo cannot be allowed to exist, just as Hamas cannot be allowed to stay in Gaza. No one will move back there, and they will retake over the area if they're allowed to remain where they are. So
right,
everything is kind of up in the air, and Israel is preparing very significantly, has moved a lot of tanks and artillery and soldiers up to the border in expectation of what could be by far, if it breaks out into an all-out conflict where the gloves are off and we're just, you know, I mean, it's going to be the damage to the infrastructure of Israel could be huge,
right,
and Lebanon will cease to be inhabitable because, unlike Gaza,
right.
where Israel has to restrain itself, we're dealing with Israel can just go, and no one has ever seen what Israel's capable of doing militarily, but it's pretty awesome.
Right.
It's pretty awesome, but the cost will be
Yeah,
tremendous.
awesome and horrific. Like
And of course, yeah.
it's horrific that a force like Hezbollah would also set their own citizens up to have to endure that response. So I actually have a question. Where the heck did Hezbollah come from? Where did they come from? How did they form? Why are they in Lebanon in the first place? Because as far as I understand, they're not the government and they're not necessarily even the government's military. So what are they doing there? And what's their story?
So Hezbollah is one of the when Israel, by the way, went into in 1982 when I came to Israel
Mm.
because the Palestinian Liberation Organization had tried to take over Jordan in Black September 1970, and they were exiled. And the
Right.
Jordanians killed a lot of them and exiled them. A lot of them moved to South Lebanon. Lebanon is a very delicately balanced country, which it's created by the French. They did such a good job with that place, almost as good as the British did with Iraq. Or actually, the French did. It's more complicated
He
because
says sarcastically.
you have a Maronite Christian population, a Druze population who are Arabic in ethnicity but a different religion, and you have Shiites and Sunnis and other interesting groups that are in there. Basically when the Palestinian Liberation Organization took over South Lebanon, they did a lot. They attacked and killed many of the Christian population, and also went after the Shiites.
Mm.
And before there was Hezbollah, there was an organization called Amal, which was a Shiite paramilitary organization in South Lebanon. When Israel went in 82 to drive the Palestinian Liberation Organization out of South Lebanon, the Shiites were throwing rice at the Israeli tanks. That's how happy they were. Because my enemy
Wow.
said, my friends, we hate the Palestinians. We hate them. Look at all the damage they've done. And what happened was Israel got stuck in Lebanon until the year 2000, setting up a buffer zone there
Right.
with you basically with Israeli military presence, with a Christian Maronite Christian presence there also. And it's during that time.
And at
This is
that
the
point,
emergence of
was there something called Hezbollah?
right. They emerged during that period. I forgot the exact year when Hezbollah is founded. I should have looked that up. I don't remember. But the emergence of the negative attitude towards Israel has everything to do with Israel embedding itself in South Lebanon for practical, not because Israel has any imperialistic designs on Lebanese territory, but
Right.
just to create what we wish we had today, which is a buffer zone to keep our enemies further away from our communities, because it was just such an unstable area. And Lebanon has proved itself basically to be incapable of controlling its own borders for many
Right.
many decades now. It's a failed state today, and its army is a joke basically.
Does the
So
Lebanese government have the same type of animosity towards Israel as Hezbollah? Are they in different places in terms of that?
again, the Lebanese government openly, of course, is animus towards Israel. But I could promise you, if you could get people on the side and ask them, like the Maronite Christians, they're a lot more kindly inclined towards Israel than they are towards the people in their own country who are the Muslim population. As a matter of fact, my prediction is, because it's such a delicate thing and there's so much interscene warfare, even in Beirut, between different parts of Beirut that are controlled. There's a Christian part of Beirut and a Muslim part of Beirut, and a Shiite controlled part of the Muslim part of Beirut. The city was divided at one point when the civil war was going on, and it's fighting all the time between different groups of people. It's such a delicate balance, which has been so upset. If Israel goes in to fight with Hezbollah, I am almost positive you will see, especially the Christian population of Lebanon, rise up and attack Hezbollah also,
Wow.
because they're also there's Druze in there also that don't like Hezbollah either. They hate,
Hmm.
but Israel's not viewed as the enemy. I think pretty much outside of Hezbollah, everyone realizes the greatest thing could ever happen to Lebanon would have peace with Israel.
Right.
It'd be the greatest win-win to have Israel on the border of Lebanon. Lebanon was a beautiful, beautiful place
Yeah.
before it was destabilized in the 1970s. It was called the Paris of the Middle East.
Right.
And
Right.
the tragedy, what's happened there, none of Israel's doing. It's because of just the history of the region and the rivalries that have nothing to do with the Arab world's attitude towards Israel. Although Lebanon invaded Israel in 1948, the Lebanese declared war on Israel and one of the Arab states that attacked Israel and its independence. But it was not because we had any territory. The world recognizes in the UN that Israel since 2000, has no territory that isn't its rightfully. Although, even though Hezbollah constantly claims this 2 square feet of land is actually a part of our territory, but they're just using that as a provocation to continue to justify attacking Israel.
Right. So what do we need to be aware of as we go into this in terms of, we know that we're preparing for war with Hezbollah. You've said that potentially within Lebanon itself, you could have factions that rise up against Hezbollah. Who is leading Hezbollah? And is there any kind of possibility for negotiation? How do we deal with that? It's just a terrorist organization that doesn't necessarily have someone who would be open to having those talks.
Right. Well, the biggest mistake we Westerners make is to tell people who are ideologically motivated and consistent that they don't really believe what they believe or plan to do what they say they're going to do. And
Right.
it's condescending, arrogant, and a fatal flaw. Hamas in its charter calls for the destruction of the state of Israel, and they quote the Hadith. The war. We want the day of redemption is not going to come until a tree and a rock say, "Oh, Muslim or servant of Allah, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill him." Hezbollah, Iran, they openly call for the destruction of the Jewish state. But again, what we need to do, when you say we, who's the we? The Jewish people in Israel. Israel needs to prepare for a war. The world needs to line up behind Israel and recognize what's at stake here. That this is a jihadi terrorist country that is trying to export violence and instability and suppression and horrendous things to the rest of the world. And the insanity of what's going on is that so much of, especially the intellectual elite of the Western world on university campuses and
Right.
and news agencies and Hollywood elites are backing the people who hate them and want to destroy their world, thinking that somehow Israel, because of their crazy intersectional worldview, that Israel is somehow the villain in this conflict. And the scary part of it has just been revealed by the director of national intelligence, Avril Harrier, I think her name is that they now have revealed that Iran, this has been going on for a long time. The communist Russia was doing this during the Cold War. Let's subvert within the countries themselves by
Right.
creating these ideologies that will literally undermine the foundations of Western liberal democracy, which is a lot of the progressive political ideologies are basically formed, fomented, and financed by these agitators. And now what's coming out is that
it's been saying very clearly now that we know Russia is involved in agitating and fomenting, division and demoralization in North America to try to weaken its stronghold on the world economy and on the world stage. And I think it sounds now like what you said. What they found is Iran is actively also participating in one of the biggest war arenas of our new century, which is social media. That Iran is consistently, actively pursuing a Cold War, in that it is effectively changing the hearts and minds of the youth of the culture to say that Iran is good and the United States is bad, or the Western ideology is
Absolutely.
bad and Islamic Jihad is good. And that's what we're seeing in protests when American kids dress up like Hamas terrorists and scream, death to Israel and from the river to the sea from the campus of Columbia University.
Right, exactly. That actually almost rhymes. From the river to the sea, the campus of Columbia University. Exactly. This is the point. And they're not only fomenting like almost an ideological civil war within Western democracies, and you're seeing this in America a lot. You see it in Canada where you are. You're seeing it all over the world. But they're actually drafting like useful idiots into their own army. And the irony of ironies is these are not like I understand why I can understand a lot better why left wing progressives were into communism because it has an ideology of
Right.
equality and justice and taking care of everyone. But when you're dealing with an ideology which does not believe that at all, which is an aggressive expansionist ideology which has zero respect or tolerance for women's rights, absolutely completely unacceptable of any divergent sexual practices, like we always say, queers for Palestine. You have these guys walking around with these openly gay LGBTQ people wearing keffiyehs. They say queers for Palestine is like chickens for KFC or cows for McDonald's. It's insane, but this is how dangerous it is. And what people really, really, really need to do is pull back and see what's at stake here. This is a clash of civilizations. It
Right.
might not be the same military threat as the Soviet Union was to Western civilization that caused the founding of NATO, but it is on an ideological level more dangerous. And it actually is infesting the West in a way that communism never was able to do, even by the massive influx of immigrants. Forgetting the
Right.
open border with America, God only knows how many people on the terrorist watch list have entered the United States and could perpetrate another 9/11 like attack. You look at what's going, look at the scenes. And I saw someone showed me the scene in Paris, like all the streets are closed off and there's thousands of Muslims praying publicly in the streets of Paris. I have no problem with religious freedom, but this is a Western Christian state that has lost its sense of identity and is literally being demographically swamped by people who are very particularist and they have a very strong ideology about what they want to accomplish. And if they don't do it with open physical conquest, they're going to do it with demographic conquest. So
Well,
this is at
interestingly
stake.
enough, I think we had a statement recently from the chief rabbi of France that basically told Jews, you got to get out. Like that
Yeah.
France is no longer a viable option for Jews to live in. And that is stunning. Stunning admission by a chief rabbi of a westernized country to say Jews get out. I mean, like he's
Exactly.
essentially making himself redundant. Like he's not saying we're going to help you, we're going to stand. No, get out. This is not a place where you're going to be safe anymore. And the world says nothing.
Right. You're right, 100%. And like the squad in America is the political manifestation of the power of this idea to infest even the highest echelon of American politics. What we just saw in the European elections is very scary. We're thinking, you saw people like Geert Wilders in Holland and Marie Le Pen in France. But then you
Mhm.
see in the end that these countries had elections and the left has done extremely well in the election, surprisingly so, despite the attempts of the more conservative, nationalistic, particularistic Europeans who still want to preserve. It's not doesn't mean you're racist because you want to preserve your own heritage, your faith, and your culture. But their last attempts now to stop their overwhelming of their cultures by foreign immigrants doesn't seem to have worked. So I think we're heading into a very dangerous period of time internationally. We'll have to see what happens with the U.S. elections because, man, America is the superpower, and as
Right.
it goes for America, it's gonna have a massive impact on the world, and we're really, Iran is about to cross a nuclear threshold, which is a game changer. Even though they're not going to have like hundreds of nuclear weapons like the Soviet Union had or Russia has today, but things are changing very, very rapidly, and the world needs to pull its head out of the sand and recognize what's at stake and get behind Israel, recognizing that Israel is the shield that is protecting the rest of the world. Because God forbid Israel would cease to exist, the whole Middle East would explode in massive violence. You already see, by the way, that Sunni powers like Saudi Arabia is not a Sunni power as a country. It has a ton of money and influence because of its wealth
Yeah,
and
so I was
oil.
going to ask you,
They're
like,
all
what's happening with Saudi Arabia? Because they're often one of the checks to Iran's power. And they were also thinking of doing this alliance with Israel, which is part of the reason we think things exploded in the first place. So where's Saudi Arabia with all of this right now?
they're already making overtures to Iran because they're afraid that the West is going to wimp out or Israel's not going to be able to finish the job. They're literally
That's
hedging their
terrifying.
bets. And a lot of the countries, a lot of Middle Eastern countries that are not really strong, because Iran is, despite that, that outdated military equipment, is a big country with a lot of missiles, and if they get new, and if they go nuclear, they're going to be able to basically dictate to the Middle East how to behave. So
So that's
everything is kind of
fascinating too,
teetering
because I
on
think
the edge.
in a Western state of mind, we think people ally themselves with the other people that they think are good. But that's not the case. What you're saying is people in the Middle East ally themselves with whoever has the power. And we know that
Power,
power and morality aren't necessarily always bedfellows. So I think in the West, that's also one of the things that we have a challenge around is we think, no, we ally with people who are good like us. And that's just in the Middle East, not necessarily the cultural language that they're using. They're like, no, we're going to ally ourselves with whoever's going to end up with the power so we don't end up eliminated. Is that
exactly.
accurate?
That is very accurate, and it's also very practical from their perspective. Saudi Arabia doesn't feel threatened by Israel. They may yell and make noises to do like virtue signaling to show they're showing sympathy for the Palestinians that they don't give a damn about. But the reality is they're really genuinely scared of Iran, and they realize, if we can't beat them, we better like, we're not going to join them theologically, but we better create some sort of relationship that isn't so confrontational. So, God forbid, this swings dramatically in a different direction. We won't find ourselves, back-footed and in a very bad strategic situation. So everything is, the ground is shaking, and the epicenter is Israel's wars it's fighting on its borders. But if the West would just wake up and see clearly and stop equivocating and understand what's at stake, and immediately, let's say we're just going to do a full court press on shutting Iran down, because the Iranian street, if that country could be controlled, and the West should be doing anything it can to foment revolution, short of
Right.
invading physically, anything it can do through propaganda, through money, through underground activities, through sabotage, and through economic, through crushing the country. If they could, they came close in 2009 when Obama was president. He did nothing. He didn't even make a public statement. They were so close to overthrowing that government. When enough people decide that they've had enough, no amount of force and power can keep an unpopular government in power. That's what history
Right.
shows us. This is what's at stake. This is what the world has to see. And it's all going to be happening the next. I'm very, very nervous about the next 3 to 6 months of what's going to go on in the world. Especially, we'll see. We'll be
Well,
in a very
I
different
think
place.
for me that I think that for me that also clarifies why Israel has to quote unquote win. Because if people ally themselves with the winners, with the people that have power, then the only way that Israel is going to be able to have allies for peace, because that's what Israel is asking for, right? The goal of Israel is not to take over the whole Middle East; it's to have peace and just simply survive, which is different than the goal, say, of Iran, which eventually wants to take over the whole Middle East. In order for Israel to have allies, in order to create peace, they have to win. And that's a really, really unusual set of circumstances that I think the Western world is so uncomfortable with because we don't like winners.
Yeah.
We don't like
Unless
winners. We
it's
like
both.
supporting the underdog. And when people win, we see them as powers that are colonialist and, are hurting people rather than no, in order to survive, we have to win. I think it's a difficult cultural mindset for people in the West to hold right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. We have to change. We got to change our attitude, and we gotta we gotta get the world back to some clarity and some sanity. And that's really what's at stake here: is who's going to live in reality and who's going to live in la la land.
Right.
I will say, all comes down to truth.
Right.
And we're, that the Jewish people, we're all about that. Israel is all about that. We just want to live in peace in the Middle East, which would be the best thing for the Middle East. Would be some peace with everyone having good relations with us. It would be a win-win for all of our neighbors. But until we have some attitude change, until we emerge victorious and create a perception that this is what wins, and this is the ideology that wins, and the economic system that wins, and the reality that we need in the Middle East, we're not going to see the world moving towards that. And that's the scary part. But let's hope, let's hope we see the world waking up sooner rather than
Amen.
later.
Amen. Amen. And And yeah, and I mean, over here, we're all just praying for the hostages to come home soon, for the soldiers to be safe, for all of this to, God willing, be avoided, and people to come to their senses soon. But thank you so much for doing this today, right before Shabbat in Israel. So really appreciate it. We'll try to record in the next couple of weeks as I'll be traveling. We'll see if we can work that out. And if not, please be in touch with us as our listeners. We love hearing from you. We would love to hear suggestions for topics or feedback on things that we've talked about. Please get in touch with Ken or myself. The information is in the liner notes, and share, subscribe, like, and send it out to anyone who you think might enjoy some of the things that we talk about here on Remember What's Next. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks, Ken.
Sally, take care. Shabbat shalom.
Bye for now. Shabbat shalom.